even though people today still use WEP. So the Wi-Fi Alliance adopted these certification names, WPA and WPA2, Personal and Enterprise. So I've drawn a little chart here just to sort of go through some of the steps of what do these terms mean and what type of encryption and authentication are used along with these terms. So we'll start by talking about WPA Personal. Now in personal modes of security, both in WPA and WPA2, the authentication mode that's being used is called a pre-shared key, or a PSK. Now PSK in this implementation is 256 bits, and since most users don't want to remember and enter a 256-bit passphrase, they make it a little bit easier for you so that you can use a passphrase that's shorter in length. They allow for a passphrase up to from 8 to 63 characters in length, and those are ASCII characters, so we're talking about letters, numbers, both capital and lowercase, and then special characters as well. So you can have as long or as short, down to 8 characters of a passphrase as you want. The longer the passphrase, the better, or the more secure. So the authentication method for both WPA and WPA2 Personal is a PSK. Now you enter this credential on both sides, both peers in a wireless communication, so on the access point and on the client, and then they go through a little dance and turn this PSK into encryption material. So as we're talking about encryption, we're going to talk about WPA Personal and WPA Enterprise here. Both WPA modes of Wi-Fi Alliance's security use an encryption protocol called TKIP. That's Temporal Key Integrity Protocol. Now TKIP was introduced and uses the RC4 encryption algorithm, which is the same algorithm used by WEP, but they've made several enhancements to that algorithm. So since it was a stopgap solution, and they knew that it wasn't going to be endlessly future-proof, they corrected it in the ways that they could, and they basically just sort of, they know that at some point it's going to expire. And today it almost has. It's still a reliable security method, but you start to see some of the cracks in the solution where they're basically just patching up the problems from WEP. So that's what TKIP is, and it's used with both WPA Personal and WPA Enterprise. Now with WPA2 Personal and WPA2 Enterprise, it uses more of a future-proof encryption algorithm in Cipher Suite. So the encryption algorithm is called AES, and it's used along with a Cipher Suite called CCMP. Now there's a lot of technologies and protocols that go along with AES CCMP. If you really want to dive down into the guts of how it's composed and how it works, we'll cover that in a different session. But for now, we just want to understand that AES CCMP is sort of the future-proof version of modern Wi-Fi encryption. So AES CCMP is always used on, or excuse me, it's not always used, but it is the primary encryption method used with WPA2 Personal and WPA2 Enterprise. Now, I say that, and I correct myself there as I'm saying that it's always used, because I want to clarify that TKIP can actually also be used with WPA2 Enterprise and WPA2 Personal. So knowing that AES CCMP is future-proof, they also want to provide sort of an accommodation for platforms to be backwards compatible. So they want to sort of invite TKIP into these same networks. So they made an accommodation that in WPA2 Personal and WPA2 Enterprise, you can also use TKIP. So TKIP is optional, but AES CCMP is mandatory. Now on the authentication front, we have two more columns, or two more spaces open here, and those are both the enterprise types of WPA. So WPA Enterprise and WPA2 Enterprise. And the authentication mode used there is 802.1x with EAP. Now I'll explain what that means here in a second. 802.1x EAP. 802.1x is something that's specified by the IEEE, and it specifies a security framework called port-based access control. Now just like I said with CCMP, port-based access control is actually comprised of a few different components, security framework. And then in addition to that security framework is something called EAP, which is also a security framework. So these two partner together, and we'll explain and clarify that in a future video. But EAP is short for Extensible Authentication Protocol, and it's a security or an authentication framework upon which specific EAP types can be built. So this is currently the most robust form of authentication that can be used with wireless LANs, and it's a very secure method if implemented properly. In the same way, AES CCNP is currently the best encryption method used, and it's very secure. Now, PSKs are secure, or they can be secure, but they have some limitations, and they're really not designed to be used, exclusively in the enterprise. There are some nice use cases for a PSK in the enterprise, but if you choose a short passphrase, this is vulnerable to dictionary attacks and some other attacks as well. So a PSK can actually be quite secure, or it can be somewhat insecure, depending on your passphrase. TKIP, like we said before, is starting to show some weaknesses based on the fact that it was built to accommodate WEP as a firmware update.